Hi there, and welcome to the Everyday Millionaire Podcast. My name is Patrick Francie, and I am your host, and I want to begin by saying thank you for listening. On this show, I am having conversations with seemingly ordinary individuals who have achieved some amazing and extraordinary results in both their life and business. My intention is to inspire and help you learn and grow by having my guests share their journey of how they face and overcome their challenges, but also how they celebrate their many wins. And now, let's get on with this show and have a conversation with today's guest. My guest today, Lance Graulich, is known as the king of franchising and the CEO of Ion Franchising, which is a prominent franchise consulting group that represents over 800 franchise brands. He has an impressive track record, to say the very least, in the franchising industry, and it has earned him the status as an industry authority. Now, he also has a very successful podcast called Ion Franchising, which is a global ranking in the top 1.5%, where he shares a lot of his insights and encourages meaningful discussions within the franchising world, which is exactly what we did today. Now, Lance's primary mission is to actually democratize business ownership through franchising. He has a passion for this goal, and it shines through on all of his work, where he's guided over 1,000 individuals to achieve their dreams of becoming successful franchise owners. His expertise has actually allowed countless entrepreneurs to embark on their entrepreneurial journey within a very supportive framework of franchise systems. Now, beyond individual entrepreneurs, Lance has played a pivotal role in the success of very, very many franchises. For example, TGI Fridays, where he contributed to a very impressive revenue of over $225 million. At the end of the day, Lance Graulich's extensive experience, unwavering dedication, and his commitment to franchising has solidified his reputation as a trailblazer and a trusted expert. In his remarkable journey, he continues to inspire and empower others to realize their entrepreneurial aspirations through franchising, which we talk about on this show. Business entrepreneurs and the advantages of buying and looking into the world of owning a franchise. Without any further delays, this is an amazing conversation with Lance. Let's get this show started. Lance Graulich, welcome to the Everyday Millionaire Podcast. Thanks for joining me.
Patrick, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Well, what I'm excited about this is that this is really business related, and a lot of my podcasts are, but I'm really excited about it because of what you do in the space of franchises. And rather than take your thunder or your explanation away, when somebody says to you these days, Lance, what do you do? What's your answer to that question?
What do I do? Well, I used to own a whole bunch of franchises. And when I thought I was going to retire, I realized that was a bad idea. I needed to be kept busy. Several of my very successful franchise owner type friends all said, Lance, you need a podcast and you need to become a franchise broker consultant. I said, what the heck does a franchise broker do? Because I never used one. I didn't even know about them. So I became a broker consultant and I help people find their perfect franchise. Most people, like the stock market, there's 4,000 plus franchises, and it's hard to understand which is best, let alone which is best for you, that matches your skills and experiences, etc. So that's what I do. And the best part, Patrick, is what I do is actually a free service. I actually get paid by the brands. So essentially, I'm like a recruiter. I recruit people into franchises and get paid a commission behind the scenes, but people pay the same franchise fee to join a brand, whether they met me or not.
So you're a little bit of a matchmaker. So behind that, as a broker, you're actually going through the process of making sure that, aside from somebody saying, hey, I want to buy this franchise, you're looking at it and going, okay, got it. But let's just dig a little bit deeper, make sure this is a match made in heaven. And if it's not, there's other options.
Yeah, I tell people the truth. I tell people that There are some brands that just want to sell you and lure you in. And, it's always a buyer beware situation, but franchising has a hell of a process behind it. It's a lot of integrity. In the United States and Canada, there are documents that need to be produced to officially be a franchise. So in the United States, it's called the franchise disclosure document. There are 23 items in there, including an earnings claim and details of the investment, not a pro forma, the actual investment, down to how much was insurance, how much in working capital, et cetera, et cetera. And so it's a great, great process with high integrity. My favorite part of the process is when my candidates get to have an actual conversation with real life franchisees that are already successful in the brand, so they can determine, can they do it? Do they feel comfortable? Do they belong in this particular brand? And if you can't find 5 people easily at the brand that are successful and happy, might not be a brand for you. So I guide people through the process. We've all heard the hero's journey. My candidates are the hero, and I'm making sure they stay away from the villains.
Well, let's unpack this a little bit. I mean, there's so much conversation to be had around this from my perspective, Lance. I've been in business over 40 years. And, it's interesting that when I reflect, I did go through a time with both my businesses, well, 2 of my 4 businesses, where I said, I should look at franchising these businesses. Having said that, I investigated it, and then I said, no, I don't. I decided against that choice. Having said all of that, my reflection of 40 years of business is that, there's a part of me that goes, yeah, man, I wish I would have bought a franchise early on, because, you get such a leg up and such a head start, in your own journey. And we'll unpack that part of the conversation in a minute. But in your own journey, did you start out with a franchise, or did you start out with your business? Then at some point when you shut it down, sold it, whatever, then said, this whole franchise thing makes sense. Give us a little bit of your background in that regard.
Yeah. So I was always an entrepreneur from a young age, and I wouldn't call what I did having any serious businesses in the early days when I was 15, 16, et cetera. But I started putzing around at a young age in business, and I come from a very entrepreneurial family. So I feel like there was some sort of natural instincts, if you will, from what I've observed environmentally and the way I grew up. But truthfully, I thought I was going to work on Wall Street in New York City. Dad's company was on Wall Street, and I thought that's what I was going to do. And I did it throughout high school and college. And out of college, I did that for a little bit and realized I'm bored to tears. I need a little more people interaction. I don't want to sit on a trading desk. I can make a lot of money doing it, but I felt like I was invincible and I can make a lot of money doing a lot of things. Mm-hmm. So an uncle in Arizona called me and said, I heard you're bored. I want to build a $1 billion restaurant company. Now, this is 1989. I'm going to be 60 before you know it. So this is 1989, and Uncle Stephen called me for help, saying, I need somebody I can trust. So I got lured in his direction. 5 years later, we were doing over $200 million a year with a TGI Fridays franchise. We started with building 4, and then we started acquiring a lot of underperforming TGI Fridays restaurants in different states throughout the United States. And it was a hell of an experience. It was a 5-year MBA program, if you will, that I felt like I got launched into even after I had my economics degree. But after 5 years, I said, Uncle Stephen, I'm out of here. And he was already heading back to Asia to go build another company, which is where he made money in the first place. And he said, I told your father you'd get bored after 4 or 5 or 6 years. And I said, yeah, I'm moving on. And I started consulting. And then eventually I had the opportunity to be invited into a Krispy Kreme donut franchise. Funny story, an old family friend also, in this case, was looking to be the second franchisee of Krispy Kreme. Funny enough, I knew somebody that was the first franchisee of Krispy Kreme donuts in New York City. That person referred me to the gentleman that got the rights to Nevada and Utah. So he launched it initially. I was otherwise occupied, making a lot of money, helping some hotels expand and, in food and beverage. And I eventually joined him in the franchise and helped him expand. And I could tell you stories for days about that experience, but Krispy Kreme was a corporate entity that had been around a really long time. To be honest, on the corporate side, they weren't very good at making money, but they had an amazing brand. People loved that original glazed donut and others. And on the franchise side is where they really came into their own. Because to be honest, they couldn't figure it out on their own on the corporate side, but through franchising, they were making money. Now, they screwed up a lot of things. They made franchisees open too many stores too quickly. And I'll tell you, Patrick, it's kind of like this. When Walt Disney created Disney World, Disneyland, how many are there in the United States? 2. Walt Disney World in Florida, Disneyland in California. Walt Disney didn't wake up one day and say, I think there could be 10 in the United States. No, because that would be an oversaturation issue, right? So Krispy Kreme didn't know. They didn't know what they were doing. And when they started franchising, they forced franchisees to take on too much development. So Southern California, for example, if I remember correctly, just in Southern California, they were told to build 22 or 25 hot shops, those big, monstrous drive-through stores. And they probably could have held 8 or 10, but not 22 to 25. And there was a lot of problems with their development agreement. So I learned a lot. I learned a lot about greed and being overly aggressive in franchising. Why not let them open 5 or 6 stores and see how they do, especially in the early days? But they actually did open stores doing $200,000 a week, $200,000 a week in Southern California. If I remember correctly, the first 6 or even 7 stores opened doing those kinds of volume.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think it was store 8 or so that opened in Southern California. And it literally did like $20,000 opening week. And that's when we knew there was a problem. So anyway, I went on, did Wingstop. I was president of the Franchise Advisory Council for Wingstop. But I ended up being a top 1% franchisee at Krispy Kreme, top 1% at Wingstop. I think I just paid attention to details, followed a system, and I was great with people. I went on to create a brand called Pink Box Donuts. I did that from scratch with a partner, and it became one of the most successful donut concepts. It's based in Vegas, and it's starting to expand. I created that from scratch part-time, believe it or not. So those are some highlights.
Well, I remember years ago, Krispy Kreme came to Canada, and it was a big deal. I mean, the press releases were huge. I don't know if I'm not a donut guy, so I don't know if they still exist or not. I'm guessing they do, but I don't know if Krispy Kreme is in Canada still or not. But I do remember how big a deal it was and how popular they were in the U.S. and there was a lot of hype around them coming into Canada. Are they still here? Just out of curiosity, do you know?
I don't even know. Yeah. I have no idea.
Yeah.
No,
Interesting.
I don't. My old buddy Albert was senior VP of operations at Krispy Kreme corporate, and Albert and I still talk, but very rarely does Krispy Kreme come up. It was a great experience for me. We were not one of the franchisees that had problems. I got that built up to about $27 million a year or so. In 2 states. We weren't even done yet when I left. I mean, it was time for me to go. I'm a builder, not a maintainer.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting about that is what you're kind of good at, what your role is, and then you move on. And that I think is a gift because a lot of business owners don't understand that component. They don't understand that part of what happens. And I know I'm guilty of that as well. I didn't find out soon enough what I'm really built for. And so now in hindsight, I would have gone on a different path perhaps, but no regrets. Yeah. I want to go back a little bit. You talked about your uncle calling you, when you were a young man back in the 80s, talking about he wants to build $1 billion franchise or $1 billion company. TGI Friday was that. Now, I mean, $1 billion back in the 80s, that's a big number. I mean, it's a big vision.
It was.
Yeah. And so you're fresh out of university or college at that time?
Yes.
I want to go back and, because often we when you look at what gets in our ways as business owners, or where people get in their own way in business, and you would know this having worked with so many business owners in your career, that's a big vision. Those are big numbers, even in today's numbers, but certainly back in the 80s, that would have been a huge stretch goal. My question is this. So you're a young man, you've gone on over the years, you've made tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars over your career. How important was it when you, at that age, I'm going to say, there's, I think, a desensitization when you start talking in billions and millions versus tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands, which is often the journey that many young people, young men, young women go on when they're building a business. They're hoping that one day they make $100,000 a year, or one day they make, $250 a year. You're entering a conversation where you've got an uncle who's already got a high degree of success that now has a huge vision, and you're immersed in it. To your point, it's like a 5-year MBA, but it's in the trenches, getting your feet and your hands dirty. How impactful was that as you grew the rest of your business, as you went on in your own career and on to doing your own thing? How much of that desensitization was there? Because $100,000 was no longer a big number to you. $1 million was no big, it was, okay, we're going to do $1 million a week, so how important is that for you, or was that for you?
Yeah, this is such a great question, because at the time, when he told me he wanted to build $1 billion restaurant company centered around this Fridays franchise, it didn't faze me, because I felt like I was going to be a lieutenant. He was leading the charge. And in fact, he ended up having to hire, as you would logically believe, he had to hire somebody that was a certified TGI Fridays operator already. He didn't, he wasn't going to start with a brand new operator that didn't know TGI Fridays. So that gentleman was Ken Green, who I'm still close with today. And Ken's referred a lot of people to me over the years. And he, in fact, moved back to Vegas recently. But so to me, it wasn't about the number. It was about being part of something big. Mm-hmm. And maybe I didn't even grasp what that number was, what that number really meant. I was just a great worker, and I was, maybe smarter than the average person, barely at the time, or at least that's what I thought. But it's so funny what you asked, because let me answer it this way. Today, so many people on social media are teaching people how to get to $100 million or all these things. And to your exact point, I think you lose a lot of people. I spoke to a guy the other day that follows a couple of prominent gurus on social media, and he's like, I just want to build my first $1 million business and be the boss.
Yeah.
And that's the breakdown, I think, on social media today is like, yeah, you can tell people about making $100 million, but most people don't even care about making $100 million. They want to, number one, be their own boss. And number two, as you said, well, essentially replace their income where they are now, and hopefully make more money than they've ever made sooner rather than later. But even more importantly, have the freedom to do whatever the heck they want to do. Mm-hmm. So when Uncle Steven called me, it wasn't even about the money. I had a whole bunch of money saved for my entrepreneurial endeavors, even though I was a young guy, just out of college, working for Dad at the time. But I was always the hardest working guy in the room. So I knew whatever Uncle Steven threw at me, I just wanted to be a part of it. And I grew to, I guess my official title was area manager at the end of 5 years, where I was responsible for a number of stores doing $2.5 to $4.5 million a year. In the late 80s, early 90s, $4 million a year was a pretty incredible number. So I learned about managing people. I made 100 million mistakes that I can certainly share some of the ones top of mind. But at the end of the day, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time.
Yeah. The show's called The Everyday Millionaire. And so you bring up what you brought up about all the gurus, make 100 million, make $1 billion, all the numbers that are out there, right? That you can do that virtually overnight. All you have to do is, download an Amazon app or something ridiculous. My point is, the whole show and the whole context for The Everyday Millionaire was because I was surrounded by business owners who weren't Richard Bransons or Cardones or Kiyosaki's. They were just individuals who put their shoulder into it, one step at a time, built multi-figure businesses, whether that be a few 100,000 or a few million. But at the end of the day, they were generating great revenue, making a great living, managing their own time, being challenged by all the things that they wanted to be challenged by in business. And it had nothing to do with making $1 billion. They wanted to make a really outstanding living. And so when I came to the conclusion that the podcast would be called The Everyday Millionaire, it was just really built on that basic concept, was that, to your point, if you're making $500,000 a year and you're a 1 or 2 man army, some would argue, well, that's not a business. You just bought yourself a job. But at the end of the day, you're an entrepreneur, you're a solopreneur, and you're making a great living. And that's a lot of times just what people want. I want to make a great living. I want to hang out with my family. I want to do family things. It depends on what your values. Not everybody aspires to be a billionaire or want the headaches that come with growing that kind of a business. And so what's your thoughts on that, Lance?
Yeah, it's so true. I just spent a couple of days this past weekend with a bunch of operators, owners of a brand called Sign World. Sign World invited myself and my wife out to take a look, and some other folks as well. And it's not officially a franchise. It's a business opportunity, and I represent them as well. And I ran into some amazing owners that are doing 1.4 to 1.7 million a year with their business.
Yep.
And they work Monday through Friday, sort of 9 to 5, no nights, no weekends. And I asked one of them, you're at 1.7 million. What's it going to take you to get to 3 million? And he goes, I'm not sure I want to get there. I'd have to hire a whole bunch of, other employees. And I got a great crew. I make a great living. I'm making more money than I'm used to making. I'm happy. I have all of the balance in my life. So that's what people don't forget. Could they scale? I could give you example after example. 1 hour heating and air conditioning. There's guys that have a couple of trucks making $2 million a year. And there's other guys that exit 1 hour heating and air conditioning for $100 million.
Yeah.
How hard do you want to work?
How hard do you want to work?
Some people don't care.
Well, let's go back a little bit, because I think that, again, within the context of, seemingly ordinary, achieving extraordinary, and the journey to get there, you had your Uncle Stephen, you talked about your dad, and that you came back, you came onto your own journey as an entrepreneur because you're kind of raised in that environment. And your dad was in Wall Street. And so where was your entrepreneurial journey? Was that driven by your parents? I often say, is it nature? Is it nurture? What was it for you?
Another outstanding question. I talk about that on my podcast a lot. Are people born entrepreneurs, or is it like a lab accident, like Spider-Man was created, bit by a spider? How did this happen?
Yeah.
But the reality is a lot of what was ingrained in me at a young age, both of my grandfathers were entrepreneurs. One of them, my mom's dad, was a real estate attorney and real estate investor, commercial, residential in Brooklyn and Queens and Manhattan, growing up in New York. And then my other grandfather from Poland, Polish immigrant that barely spoke English, started with a little corner store, bodega, as we call it. And he built it into a supermarket, a multi-unit, 11 locations to be exact. And he had that for almost 30 years. And until he exited that, he actually got sick. But the point is, I grew up in that environment, so I got to experience it. So my dad used to say it when I was young, there's probably not a chance that you're going to be employable. You've grown up with all this madness. So, but so I wasn't average in that regard, where I had to, it came easy to me because I got to see that Grandpa would drive a Cadillac when nobody had a Cadillac in the old days, and smoke his big fat cigar and had his own schedule. And my other grandfather, who had a different personality, the attorney, was equally as successful, but, they did whatever they wanted. They didn't have a schedule. They didn't have a clock to punch.
Mm-hmm.
So, and my dad, pretty much being a partner in a Wall Street firm, was about the same. So, for me, it was always, I wanted more because I saw what life could be like. It wasn't just punching a clock and doing the 9 to 5, but I still wanted to experience that when I joined Dad on Wall Street. Now, Dad loved it. He was the first guy in the office and the last guy to leave the office. Not because anybody told him he had to. That was him.
Mm-hmm.
And that's me.
I think there's a part, we often use, it's a bit of a cliche, but it is the truth. When your vocation is your vacation, you'll never work another day in your life. Ultimately, if you're loving what you do, then you're not going on a vacation to escape. You're going on a vacation to rest. And you're excited about going back, but you need that break. Many people go on vacations to escape, and they go off the rails, they go into some other persona because they're really not living their highest values or their highest calling in their normal life. So again, I always go back to a story that just has stuck with me for so many years. And I just finished speaking and came off the stage, and a young man approached me and said, "Gosh, Patrick, I listened to your story, and how many hours a week do you work?" And it literally stopped me, and I went, I don't know how I would answer that question. I go, I have no clue. It's just my life. And working or putting in time or speaking on stage or coaching or doing whatever I do, that's just my life. I don't look at it, how many hours a week do I work? Am I enjoying living my life? And am I living into my vision for my life? And if the answer is yes, then I'm good. And so it was just an interesting way to, when he said that, how it framed for me in that moment. And I took a lot away from that simple question, which was, no, I love what I do. So to me, it's not how many hours am I working. I'm just living my life, and am I happy with my life? So I say that only in a context, Lance, is that you seem to have been brought up in that environment. And so there is a kind of a path that I want to go down on this long-winded question, which is when you look at when you were brought up, you're in that environment, you've got uncles and grandfather, father. Now, they're in that space. How encouraging were they of you? And I say that because often I hear and see parents that put their limiting beliefs on their kids. And so when I talk to my guests, it doesn't seem to matter. Often I hear from my guests, my parents were encouraging to a fault. They just told me, you do whatever you want to do. If you fail, that's okay. You're not going to fail. You're going to hit it out of the park. They were encouraging to a fault. So I never even realized that I had any weaknesses. I just kept doing shit, and, things worked. So I give that kind of as a big, long-winded, prelude to how was it for you?
Yeah, well, and that's another great question. But, for me, it's interesting because Dad really was an employee while he was a partner. He became a partner in this Wall Street firm and did incredibly well. And, the other two grandfathers were true entrepreneurs. Mom was a school principal, and she didn't have to work. So she ran that school she was the boss of, including the superintendent. But, so Dad, he always put the limiting beliefs and put the doubt, and so did Mom when I went to do anything. Mm-hmm. And at one point, they gave me money to shut me up, a little bit of money to say, go do whatever you want to do, but don't ask me for any more money. And I went and put a partnership together and ended up launching Wingstop way back when, and had a little bit of their money involved in it. But there is no doubt that everybody has limiting beliefs. And you could always tell the people that have never had their own business, never started their own business. And, Dad didn't start his own business. He followed his older brother into Wall Street. He was very good at what he did. Dad had an accounting background, but he didn't start the business. Somebody else did. So when I tell him I'm starting a business, both my grandfathers had passed by then. I had no backup, Patrick, no backup. Because, it's like when I get off the first phone call with anybody that's looking into entrepreneurship, like you, for example, if it was your first business ever, you're going to tell everybody you had this great phone call with this nice guy, Lance, and I could be an entrepreneur. I could actually do this. Well, if you are talking to people that have never been business owners, ever, what are they going to say to you?
Dream killers. Yeah.
What are you, nuts?
Yeah.
You don't know totally. What you're doing. Remember the last time you lost money doing this and this, and you don't even work hard, or all of a sudden again, these are people with no growth mindset, all fixed mindsets, and have watched every reason under the sun as to why everybody's going to fail in life and business, etc. So I was fortunate that, Dad did get to see what, both of my grandfathers accomplished. And he knew I was more like them than I was like him. And he knew that. And that was really the true answer. So he supported me in any way he could. I try to stay clear of him. I don't want to ask too many questions because he got frustrated easily. So I got my own set of professionals around me, although I made mistakes with that in the early days. You never know who you can trust. And, I had to fire my first accountant, CPA, and even called Dad and my other uncle who's a CPA for help. And it's like, I don't know who this CPA person was, but they screwed up everything up with these LLCs. And I'm like, yeah, I know, because I had a whole bunch of restaurants. So you live and learn, but you just push forward. The goal in life is to never make the same mistake twice. I want to go back to something you said, though. I had two different old men thrown in front of me. I'm a big believer in fate. And they told me something interesting. They gave me unsolicited advice almost 10 years apart. This was many years ago. You seem like a nice young man. We want to give you some advice. And again, this is two individuals 10 years apart. Put yourself in a financial position to retire and don't. And what I learned from a lot of people, look at Warren Buffett. He put himself in a financial position probably 50 years ago, and he never retired because people need, and this was on one of your podcasts recently. There was you were talking about mindset, community, and collaboration are two big pieces in life that are proven to help us live longer. We want to feel like we belong to something. And what I got to experience with these sign world folks, business owners this past weekend was incredible. It's everything that franchising is about. When you join a mastermind and everybody's got a different business, but let's say it's a Tony Robbins mastermind. I'm not endorsing it or saying it's great or not. I know people that have been through it and paid a lot of money for that. You have a lot of people from all walks of life. And the good news is everybody gets to share and you learn from each other. The better news in a franchise, which I call a mastermind, is that everybody's doing the exact same thing.
I love it. Yeah.
So that collaboration, you have franchisees spending a whole day and a half with us. So we as brokers and future franchisees are there witnessing all this, listening to them, licensees, I should say. These guys are donating, and gals are donating their time to their fellow licensees and newbies, if you will, to present their experience and why you should join. They're not getting paid by the brand. They just want great people in the brand like them because somebody before them helped them get into the brand. So franchising is like this big fraternity, sorority feel where everybody's for the common good. And so that community feel, though, to come full circle really on your question, is really what it's all about. It's belonging to something where everybody's pushing in the same direction.
You said something that was a couple things. We were talking just off camera about Real Property Management, who's one of the trusted partners for the Real Estate Investment Network, one of my businesses. And I've had the opportunity to speak at, 3 or 4 of their kind of annual events where they get together as a community, as all their franchisees come together and they have their annual meeting. And I've done some keynotes, and it really is empowering, even for me as a keynote, to be in that environment with a group of really cool people all kind of committed to the same thing, which is to grow the business. Now, I want to go back because, there's something about franchises. So again, one of the businesses I own today is 40 years old. I literally have not had a key to that business since 2005, and I love it, and a great team of people, and it really is just a great asset that I own, that I still love the industry and all the rest of it. But here's the thing about it is that I look at and work with so many small business owners, and I'm sure you've had this experience too, where you look at it and it's tough building a business from scratch because you ultimately run into what do I do next? How do I hire somebody? How do I justify the cost?
Yeah.
Like, you're going through all these kind of challenges that you face so that you don't
You run out of pavement, you're off road.
Yeah, exactly. And I go back to, there was two books, a number of them, I've read a number of books that were instrumental, but early on there's actually three books that were kind of forks in the road. One was The Wealthy Barber. Read that when I was like 20 years old. That took me off on a journey. Then I read Rich Dad, Poor Dad. That took me off on a journey. But then the book that I owned while I was into my business was The E-Myth Revisited and The E-Myth by Michael Gruber. Yeah. And you know something? Those books were instrumental, because then I said, okay, well, I get to be a business owner, not a one man or a solopreneur. I really wanted to own that asset called a business. Now, here's my point to all of that, which is this many years later, franchises have become a far, I think, greater thing. They're more refined and they're not all great, but then there's guys like you who actually filter and come to some conclusions around what are great franchises. Because I think part of the problem is that many people have bought franchises and the franchise wasn't cool. They didn't work through a broker. They stumbled across that particular franchise. They didn't know what questions to ask. That's a huge departure from, number one, starting a business on your own and building it from the ground up, which in hindsight, I don't know if I'd do that again. Like, if I was a younger man, I'm 65 now and I'm kind of on that Freedom 95 program because I don't ever want to quit working. But the point is that I think I would do a franchise now rather than start from grassroots. And I would work with a broker like you who could work with me to find the right business, so I'm not starting from scratch. Like, it just, as an experienced business owner, franchises to me are the answer. Like, that's just my opinion these days.
Well, and look, they get a bad rap. There are people listening that are going, I know somebody that got involved in a franchise and it was terrible and he hated it or she hated it. Mm-hmm. The reality is, again, there are bad franchises out there. Mm-hmm. You can't and won't fit into every single franchise. But I make sure that my folks go through a very rigorous process. The brands all have their own process, but I'll be checking along the way, because there are people that lust after certain brands and get excited, start salivating that this is their brand. And I said, well, I need you to go through the process and finish off checking out the other brand just to make sure, because you want to check off all the boxes. It's like the pre-flight checklist. Mm-hmm. You can't be in a hurry. You have to make sure you do all the proper things. And again, go through that franchisee validation. But at the end of the day, I'm a free resource. Patrick, I have people every day I talk to. I talked to a gentleman today in Washington, D.C. He had talked to at least two other franchise consultants over the years. And he kind of got upset, because it seemed like they were trying to push certain brands on him that he didn't really like. He's like, are these people actually listening to me? Mm. And I listen to people. I want people to be happy. All of my business today is from my podcast, being a guest on podcasts, and my circle of people, which is a rather large circle these days. And I get sometimes 4 or 5 referrals a week from my, not even podcasts. But that's my goal, is to make the individual listening to this happy by their investment in a franchise. And they're so successful, they tell 2 or 3 people. I had a guy buy a home care franchise in Northern California. He was so happy within 3 months of him becoming a franchisee of this brand called Home Helpers. He sent 3 friends my direction almost at the same time. And one of them bought also a home care franchise. He knew how happy he was. Not the same one, because they're living in the same area. So they're essentially competitors in a similar area of Northern California, but they're friends, and we could talk about what senior home care is all about. Amazing, amazing business. So there are so many industries and so many businesses that people have no idea even exist today. And just because you're a doctor or just because you're selling insurance today doesn't mean that you can't be in another business. I have an old friend that's bald, does not know how to cut hair, yet he owns 19 Great Clips hair salons. Mm. And it started with him laughing that that's a stupid business for him. Why would somebody suggest a hair salon when he's bald and doesn't know how to cut hair? Well, I call it your what. What is your investment? What is your role going to be? What are your skills? And in his case, he realized his what was a $200,000 SBA loan in the US. And he wanted his money back in 2.5 years. And he didn't mind being active in the business, even if he didn't know much about it. He would learn and be trained to run the business. And sure enough, it became Great Clips. As soon as it settled in, it became Great Clips. And 14 years later, he has 19 locations.
Wow.
And he already gave the keys to his daughter several years ago to run the whole thing. And but that's how it goes in franchising. That's the beauty. You said it earlier. Most people truly don't have an original idea. You mentioned how hard it is to build something from scratch. Most people don't have an original idea that truly needs to be born.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason so many people like Mark Zuckerberg and Michael Dell and a lot of people, Steve Jobs they all started out of college. Why? Well, because if you fail, you lose nothing. You don't lose a house. You don't lose a marriage. You lose nothing. You're in the same exact spot and you do something else. So it's much easier when you're young to create something from scratch because you truly have nothing to lose. And if you don't have an original idea, man, I have a tiny home franchise. They're killing it. The corporate location in California did $88 million last year in revenue. Tiny homes.
Who knew?
Who knew?
Okay, so let's unpack a few things because, there's a lot that you've said in just this last little bit that kind of tweaks some questions for me. So let's kind of maybe kill some myths and or start some new ones. I don't know. But the question I would have is that when you look at franchises, there's a couple of, back to what I said earlier, there's a couple of entry points. So you can be a boots on the ground, in the trenches kind of worker, or you can be a franchise owner. So in other words, let's say somebody like myself or you've got lots of years of experience. You go, all I want to do is put some capital to work. I've got some business acumen. I want to own a franchise, but I don't want to get into the trenches day to day. I'll manage it. I'll wear the CEO hat. I'll run the finances in the back end. Now that exists in a franchise opportunity, as does the opposite, which is, okay, no, I'm going to put on the boots. I'm going to get in the car. I'm going to go and do the work. Both those opportunities and everything in between exists. Or is that the truth, or where am I making up stories?
That is the truth. The two largest segments of franchising are the owner, that is the full-time owner-operator. So Great Clips, for example, they want you to be a full-time owner-operator. They are not interested in part-time owners or semi-absentee ownership, as it's called in franchising. Mm-hmm. However, I have a ton of businesses that welcome semi-absentee owners, mm-hmm. home service brands, business services, whatever, every industry imaginable. I have where you can be what we call a semi-absentee owner. Mm-hmm. And that's when you're working on the business, not necessarily in the business, 10 to 20 hours a week. And you're typically, what also happens in that scenario is you're going to hire a manager, and that manager will have to be full-time in the business. Mm-hmm. Because at the end of the day, the franchise, somebody needs to run it. Somebody needs to watch the baby. And that's, now, if you want it to be an absentee owner and be truly passive, we do have some things where the brand will actually manage through a third party. They will manage your business for you. And I have some very interesting opportunities there. But I always tell people, it's okay. You should just try to be a semi-absentee owner at minimum. Yeah. But it also depends on your skills. If you've never managed people before, at all, it's kind of hard to jump into business ownership part-time.
Yeah, it only took me 25 years to create it, almost 30. But the point is that my business that I own in another city, in another province, is literally, I've got my general manager, I've got my management team. They do a great job. I touch base with them on a regular basis, and really they're making all the day-to-day decisions. And If I'm having a conversation with them, it's generally updates of what's going on, any decisions you need made, are we expanding the budget, those kinds of things. And for me, it's a pretty ideal situation. But again, I had to get to that place, Lance, and this is probably what you see in the clients that you work with. I think most people who start their own business start out from a place of, I'm a technician, I'm working in the business, yet we have to transition. If you're going to grow that business, you have to get outside of that role and have to say, no, I'm going to work on the business. So whether you do it vis-a-vis a franchise or you do it yourself, if you're going to grow a business, it means you have to duplicate yourself. You have to put yourself out of a job, and that really becomes your job. How do I put myself out of a job? By replacing myself in that role.
I have a great story about that. I have a guy that came to me with his father, and he started an HVAC company, heating and air conditioning company. And he did it on his own. And 8 years later, I'm talking to him and his son wanted me to help his dad get to the next step. And I said, well, what's your revenue? And he said, well, 8 years later, I'm proud I'm at just over 800,000 in revenue. I said, well, that's nice. And he said, why would I do a franchise? I said, well, because with a franchise, you pay your franchise fee, and the first year you're going to do 800,000 in revenue. And he just looked stunned. I could have saved 8 years. Not only that, the average franchisee in that particular brand does 4 million in revenue, because most owners, you said it perfectly, the E-Myth states all of this. Most people are technicians. We hope you have assets and skills when you join any brand. But there are 3 components to being a business owner, as the E-Myth lays out. Technician is one of them. And if you're an owner, most owners, I just got my wife's niece and her husband the same air conditioning franchise I'm talking about, 1 Hour Heating and Air Conditioning. They're already out of training. Justin's 29. He's running it full time. He doesn't know anything about air conditioning.
I love it.
But he's already been through training. He's hiring his techs. He's following their system. He called me the other day. He's like, I can't believe how every time I have any question, they're like right on it to give me the answer. Like, I get stressed when I have a question and they're right there answering everything. I said, you have all the support you need. This poor guy took 8 years to get to 800,000. He could have paid 40 grand to get in. Now, what I also told him now is, look, you've been in this 8 years. You know what? You don't even have to pay the 43,000, I think it is. You'll get a discount because they can do a conversion for you, convert your existing HVAC business to 1 Hour Heating and Air Conditioning, and you get a better deal than the 43. And the sky's the limit. But if your personality or mentality are not where they need to be, you're better off just selling the business and moving on with your life, because scale is another, you still have to work, until such point you can just maintain. There was a point with my wing stops that I had a whole bunch of them, and I had a team. I didn't do anything for a while.
Mm-hmm.
That's the best place to be, like you right now.
So I'm going to say something that I'm pretty sure you'll probably agree with me, but for some listening, it may sound a little controversial, but this is how I see it. A lot of what I do is in economic research, and I pay a lot of attention to what's going on in the world because of what we do on the real estate side of things and the education and the economic research that we do. So I'll make this statement, is that given what's happening globally, and I'm talking about politically, I'm talking about the banking system, I'm just talking about the at least 4 potential wars melting down, Ukraine being part of UK or the UN, what that could that possibly cause? Like, what I'm seeing is a global meltdown at some level. That's how I'm just going to say it that way. And to whatever degree that people hear that is serious. My point is, right now, when it comes to how do we secure or have some kind of financial future, some kind of financial certainty or security, or even dream about financial freedom, it can't be struggling and wanting to hold on to a career, especially if you've got any aspirations or entrepreneurial skills. Because right now, I think that in this world, you have to find a business, a side hustle, something outside of this thing you call a career or call a
Right.
job, because that's the highest risk. I think the highest risk category, given what's happening in a geopolitical world that we're facing today. I would like your view of that. I'm not saying I'm right. That's
Yeah.
just my view of it, Lance. How do you
No,
see it?
you're right. No, you're absolutely right. There's no reason, regardless of what your skill set is, your mindset, your experiences in life thus far, everybody can own a business. The question that remains is what business? And that's what I help people with. That's what I help facilitate. And there's nothing better than a franchise today
Mm-hmm.
if you don't have an original idea that you're burning to, give birth to, burning inside you, so to speak. But the question, in the world of franchising, service businesses, essential businesses, recession-proof businesses, the large majority of franchise businesses are set up to be around. They're Amazon-proof, they're robot-proof. There's no reason not to look at franchises. Technology has really advanced franchising. In the old days, when you go to training, you had to go for, a couple of weeks to a restaurant, for training. Nowadays, you have this learning management system. You're learning, you're doing your checklist, you're doing your assessments and tests and
Technology.
quizzes. And then you go to training for a shorter period of time.
Mm-hmm.
And so technology has sped up all of our learning, all of our education, and the ability to be successful. But franchising, there's never been a better time. I mean, I have a gentleman now that used to own about 85 Dunkin' Donuts in New Jersey. Well, not New Jersey, the New York metro area. And he sold all those. And he called me the other day. He goes, Lance, what do you think about urgent care franchises? And I said, well, I have a great one for you. Unfortunately, they're sold out in New Jersey, but there's availability in New York. So these are the calls I get. I help existing entrepreneurs continue to pile on or pile in. And I help a lot of first-time entrepreneurs as well. But there are so many amazing opportunities. I have a roofing franchise called Best Choice. And first-year franchisees are doing millions in revenue just because they're connected to the system. My favorite recent story you're going to love. A guy was working for Best Choice Corporate, and he was helping franchisees. He was doing everything. And he got probably tired of seeing all the success from these franchisees. And he's like, can I be a franchisee? Now, notice, he didn't say, can I leave the system, leave the company with all this knowledge and do my own thing all on my own? He said, can I be a franchisee? In his first year as a franchisee, he did $8 million in revenue.
Wow.
Because he knew everything. He was already the guy on the ground. He just, turnkeyed it literally. So, look, at the end of the day, there's a lot of success stories. And if you want to talk about setting up your own business to franchise, we could talk a little bit about that as well.
Well, I think we should. I mean, there's always that possibility that we have listeners who are in that position. Again, when I look at my own scenario, I chose not to after doing, and we had opened up. We rather than franchise, I was at one point, I think 7 locations or 8 locations, and we were into the US and we were doing a lot of things. And then ultimately I didn't like the way it was going, and I had partners, and so I shut it all down. But the point is that it's surprising I think people have this kind of preconceived notion of what a franchise can be, but really there's no limitations to what it can be. It depends on how you set it up and how you go forward with it, because there's some that are like literally surprising me in terms of what the possibilities are around a franchise. But let's talk about that. Why don't you give us some insights into that whole concept?
Yeah, I mean, as far as setting up your independent business to be a franchise system, by the way, you're in Canada. Schooley Mitchell and Everline are 2 off the top of my head, founded in Canada and amazingly successful in the US as well. But here's the thing. It's a pretty quick little quiz, if you will, as to whether you should be franchising your business. Number 1, are you successful and profitable? And if you add a little bit of a royalty of 5%, 6%, depending on what industry you're in, can franchisees be profitable with your model paying that royalty? More than likely, yes. Are people already asking for your type of business? If, hey, do you franchise? A lot of successful businesses, people tend to ask, do you franchise? This would make a great franchise. But the other piece is, are you planning on expanding throughout the United States or Canada? If you're not even planning on that, using your own capital, then franchising is probably for you, because franchising is the easiest way to get you across the United States or Canada. It's the easiest thing in the world if you have a great system, procedures in place. You can always buff those out, so to speak. When I joined Krispy Kreme, those systems, that company had been around a really long time, like 50, 60 years. The systems were terrible, but we helped get them better. Wingstop, they didn't give you much more than a recipe guide. There wasn't much of an operations manual in the early days, but we added those pieces as we grew. As I mentioned earlier, learning management systems make that easy. There's a lot of great templates out there to create and customize what you need. But at the end of the day, do you have something a little bit unique? Just because somebody has an air conditioning company today doesn't mean that it's not going to work, because some people will say, oh, there's too much competition. Well, it's like when Five Guys Burgers opened, everybody said there's already 1 million burger places, from Red Robin to all kinds of fast food. But Five Guys created their own niche that became known as fast casual dining. Fast casual was not a drive-through and not food service, not waiters and waitresses. So ideally, if you have something that is proprietary, somehow different operating system, then it's probably a business that needs to be born. But if you're listening, I have no problem having a free conversation with you about franchise setup. And, I'll get you a proposal. And I have a partner in my franchise setup business. We have franchise attorneys, and we have a whole big team that sets this up. Actually, we do it all over the world. I just referred somebody to our Australian franchise attorney, but we do Canada and we do the US very regularly.
I love it. Now, you said something earlier on, we were joking around, and I don't know if we were still off camera or not, but you made a comment about, how many mistakes you've made, 100 million of them or something like that. So when we look at often with small business owners and individuals that you're coaching, guiding, I know I'm the same way, is that you're having conversations with a lot of the limiting beliefs. Beyond that is the fear of what they would be saying is a fear of failure. And, there is a kind of a world that you get into at some point, or a line that you cross, which is to say, making mistakes and or failing just becomes an expectation. You know that it's not going to work every time. I remember many years ago, a friend of mine who's made multi millions. I'm sharing some time on his boat in the Caribbean, and I asked him the question. I go, what do you owe your success to? And he said, I don't make mistakes. And I went, in the moment, I went, well, that seems really arrogant. That was my self-talk in that. And then he came back, I just get a result. And it's either the result I want, or it's not a result I want. I put in the correction, or I kick it to the curb. All to say that he doesn't look at anything as a mistake. He doesn't look at it as failure. He looks at it as I didn't get the result I wanted. I'm going to put in the correction and keep moving, or I'll kick it to the curb and shut it down. But it's all part of the game. And, I don't know if you want,
process.
What is your kind of profound advice on that? Your wisdom that you would share with somebody on that, Lance?
Yeah, I made all kinds of mistakes, including, marrying the wrong woman the first time around.
Yeah.
That was a heck of a detour that taught me so much.
Practice life.
Getting a bad accountant, getting a bad attorney, those issues and problems really had major ramifications for me. But there's an old saying, just don't make the same mistake twice. Failing, you better fail forward, not backward. keep going. And that's really the message, is just keep going. Things will get better, and you can't be afraid of it. It is part of a process. Sometimes I was talking to a guy, because I have a new show on my podcast called Franchise Envy. And it's a series focused on successful, happy franchisees, people that have done it. And they don't have to be, these are exactly people designed for your show, the everyday millionaires. And I was talking to a guy, like a pre-screen for a future episode. And I said, Patrick, you seem like a really happy guy. He goes, I love this. He goes, I've been in this business a couple of years. And it's like Mr. Toad's Wild Ride. That's an old Disney ride, Mr. Toad's Wild Ride or something. He said, boy, these ups and downs, but I wouldn't change a thing. If you asked me if I would do it over again, absolutely. And that's entrepreneurship, and again, on your show recently, when you're talking about mindset, the variability, people don't want to do the same thing every day. Nobody purposefully wants to work an assembly line job. I mean, no disrespect to anybody that's on an assembly line building cars, but if it's the same thing every single day for 30 years, 40 years, whatever it is, that's not for me. And entrepreneurship is all about the changing environment, but you just get better. You get better, you get a little stronger. That's life.
I think you have to be a little bit philosophical. When I look at failing, I always equate it to going to the gym. You don't know how much weight you can lift until you get to that point where you lift that weight and you can't pull it off. And then you go in and you have to start over, and then you get stronger, and eventually you can lift that weight. I think there's an illusion and a lot of times business is just philosophical, isn't it? Is that you get to the point where we have this expectation for some reason, probably social media is a big part of it. Whatever story we tell ourselves, we're looking at, my wife works with world and Olympic class athletes, and we look at them on the podium and we go, oh, I want that. Somebody says, I want to one day have a gold medal, whatever that might be. And they see the result. They don't see the work that went into getting the result. So then all of a sudden they get into it and they go, fuck, this is hard. This is hard work, and it's like, yeah, it is hard. And you've got to be prepared and want and be okay with doing the hard work. That's part of being an entrepreneur. So that's a lead into this. I'd like to hear from you based on your experience. Do you think everybody's cut out to be an entrepreneur? Or do you think some guys, nope, go to your assembly line, go to the TikTok 9 to 5. That's what you're wired to do. What's your kind of own philosophical kind of view of that world?
I do think that everybody should step up to the table, so to speak, and have the conversation to determine that. Because I think there are more people doubting themselves than anything, that aren't even sure. So, the difference between starting and being stuck, they both start with the letter S and T, but they're completely different results. And I think there's a lot of people that are afraid to start and remain very much stuck. They don't know. Now we have so much information. We're an information overload. And all these people talking about $100 million and all this, when people just need the nudge or the push. And that's what I love about what I do, because I do like to believe that everybody is capable of being an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
And you know why I believe that? Because I've seen people scared out of their minds become an entrepreneur and blossom and flower into this amazing, successful individual in their own right. And then in some cases, they start creating their own stuff because now they have the confidence and they have the ability, because they've now built their own business. They know how to do things they did not know before. They know about marketing and purchasing. It was handed to them on a silver platter via the franchise. And even if it's in a completely different industry, you can pivot 90 degrees and do something else, having that confidence in yourself and your abilities, and developing new skills. You put in the reps. You worked hard. It's amazing what cash flow confidence does for people. So yes, I believe anybody can do it. Not everybody can take on all industries or all businesses. So we can start small with certain people. It's just like a starter house, if you will.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be a mansion.
Yeah, I love that. So when you let's talk about a couple things. Now you've come a long way, of course, in developing and growing your businesses and what you do and who you are. And, at this point in your life, you're kind of going, okay, well, I get to choose what I want to do. You've got a couple podcasts. One of your podcasts, I know it sounds like you started a new one, but you also have an existing.
No. It's the same one. It's called Ion Franchising, EYE on Franchising, almost 3 years old already.
Yeah.
It's top 1.5% of all podcasts in the world, I guess. So I'm proud of that.
Yeah.
And, I talk to franchise founders. I talk to people that are resources for the franchise industry and certainly successful franchisees. I have a new show called Franchise Road Trip. It's not even out yet, where I actually visit franchise brands and kind of go through a day in a life. And it's fun. It's almost like a diners, drive-ins, and dives, if people are familiar with that. And I actually have a free assessment, my franchise finding assessment, on my website at lancegraulich.com. I'm sure you'll put the link in the notes here for this, but I have multiple websites. But it helps me and you understand your mindset, skill set, and life experiences, and what franchises might be best for you. So free, and it's on my website. If you want to DM me on Instagram or something and find me that way, just hit me with Patrick, so I'll know where you came from, and I'll send you the assessment directly on Instagram or any of my platforms.
Beautiful. We'll do that. We'll get those links in there. I want to go and be a little bit more in terms of where you are and how some of what you got there. Now, like, again, we work hard as entrepreneurs, business owners. We get to where we get to. We do all the things that we do. I'm curious for you, was there a time or a fork in the road moment for you that took you in a specific direction? Was there a fork in the road moment that was really impactful in your life, aside from maybe leaving your first wife and finding your next wife? But from a business point of view, was there something that was really impactful in a fork in the road moment for you?
Yeah, there's so many occasions. I always believe, like people tell me all the time, I want to find an existing business. And these are people that never had a business in the first place. I said, well, it's very competitive looking for an existing business. You'll probably get outbid a multitude of times. You might be looking for 5, 6, 7 years, like a lot of people. And I always tell people, when you put yourself in business, like with a franchise, and then you decide you want to buy some existing businesses, if that's the case, and build your empire that way, it's amazing. When you're already in business, it's amazing what the universe brings to you, that old classic law of attraction. When you're already in business, you have more opportunities that come to you. So when you talk about the fork in the road effect, when I left, my uncle's Krispy Kreme deal, and I never made any great money there. I guess I did for a young guy, but I didn't have equity in the company or anything. I now allowed the environment or the world to throw me opportunities. And I moved back to Vegas at the time for the first time, not having a job, and started consulting for different people, because now I felt I had the confidence. I knew more than most restaurant owners because I had a formal education. So in that path, as you're leaving one thing and putting the right energy forward, it's amazing what things come to you. My Krispy Kreme opportunity as a partner, I got invited in by a guy that was a Dartmouth MBA, didn't know anything about restaurants, loved Krispy Kreme. And to be honest, his team completely screwed up that franchise, what he did. He was well, I shouldn't say losing money. He was losing a lot of money. He was still making money, but he had a very dishonest team, and he brought me in, and I, fired everybody and started over, and we were incredibly profitable very quickly because I knew how to do that. But the reason I bring that up is, again, this whole law of attraction thing. I was looking for the next opportunity, and I kept bumping into opportunities. A friend of mine that was the head of the California Restaurant Association was the one that told me about Wingstop. I should call so-and-so. His friend is the president of Wingstop. So the more you put yourself out there with positive energy, the more results I think you get. Do not sulk. Do not sit on the couch and eat bonbons, so to speak. Keep yourself moving forward regardless of what happens. I had plenty of setbacks with partners. I'll never forget in one of my agreements when there was an argument, I remember saying to my attorney, "Why is this a problem?" He said, "Well, because you're making a lot of money and this partner's not exactly honest." And he found a loophole in the agreement. And then that's a whole other story as to why this attorney would allow a loophole in the agreement. Why would there be a gray area that we're going to fight about in court? So I've seen enough lawsuits. I've seen enough headache. But the one thing I've learned and loved is truly building businesses and helping people get there. So my final thought on that one is just keep moving forward and pushing forward. And sometimes a setback is actually a gift. It's an opportunity to recharge and recalibrate what your goals are. Every experience you have, if you've done it right, there's going to be something you learn from it. And my wife, my new wife now of the last 15 years is amazing and perfect. And we come across opportunities on a regular basis because I'm in the world of franchising. And every time I turn to her and say, "Honey, maybe we should do this," she looks at me and she goes, "I'm enjoying our vacations. You're much better relaxed than you are diving into business as much as you love it." So that's the other part of it. When you have enough money, at some point it's like, it's not worth it. I'd rather go on vacation every month.
Yeah. A couple of questions that I just want to kind of finish up. You've been really generous with your time, and I appreciate it, Lance.
Of course.
Is when you look at, as I listen to you, I hear somebody that's pretty clear on a lot of things. Number one is whether, and this is the question, but you seem quite clear on your values, your core values, what's important to you, what you stand for. Has that always been the case, or has that been a bit of a learning curve? And then you got to a place where you go, "No, I'm really clear on my values. It's either this or that. If it doesn't fit, then it doesn't work."
Yeah.
Did that take some time for you to get there, or were you kind of that way?
Unfortunately, it took some time. My father was, we always try to be a better example than what we, grew up with. My father was actually far better than me at quite a few things. When I was younger, I loved working and loved business, but that's part of the reason my first marriage failed.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't, I built the dream house that was, 5,500 square feet on a half acre and, everything I thought I always wanted. However, it was a problem because I had no work-life balance, and that was my choice. I didn't know it at the time, but it was my problem that I did to myself. And with my new wife, all these years later, you talk about, my core values. I have to make sure my family's happy and I'm focused on my family. It's not just what I can build.
Yeah.
Like that old man building some classic car and ignoring his family, missing dinner and having the dinner in the microwave, when he's ready. That was essentially me in the old days as a young man. And I really didn't take a lot of vacations. So as I've gotten older, I've really appreciated slowing down and helping other people. And sometimes I feel like the guy that, although I don't have a gray beard and long gray hair yet, I feel like I'm in a rocking chair most of the time as I'm talking to most of my candidates/clients about what they should be doing in life. And I love the hell out of having those conversations.
When you come to understanding where you've arrived, it takes a lot of leadership. It takes certainly self-understanding. Was that work that you do? Some people talk about being natural leaders. I'm not that guy. I have to actually study leadership. I do study it. I study others. And to be always looking at being the best leader I can be, how is it for you? Is that a body of work that you do in the personal and professional development space? Or again, was it just kind of figured out as you go and you seem to have the knack for it?
Yeah. Another great question. I definitely had some natural ability looking at my grandparents, looking at my father, looking at my mother as a school principal, little 5'2" lady that might as well have been 6'2" to people because she was a presence. So I learned a lot of leadership lessons at a young age. However, I'll tell you a great story. When I joined TGI Fridays, I'll never forget, I was assigned to one location when I first was in management training. And this head waitress in the middle of a Friday night, her name was Karen. And Karen, I had a server or two servers that weren't doing what I had asked them to do. Now, remember, I was straight out of New York, living in the Phoenix area. Technically, this was Mesa, Arizona, where this location was, in a quieter area. And I remember I was mad, and I said something to Karen, who was the head waitress, head server. She was a leader in that building. And she looked at me and she said, "It's because you're an asshole."
Yeah.
And as soon as she said that, see, one of the best pieces of advice of leadership, and that was one of them right there that I got, is you need to have self-awareness. And what that told me, and she and I had to sit down later that night, was if I change and I treat people differently, I will be more successful. So the classic, what's in it for me? So what I was very good at was continuous improvement, which is what every business should be looking for, but every individual needs to look for. How do I make myself better? I'm in the gym 6 days a week. It might hurt sometimes. I'm almost 60, but I'm in the gym 6 days a week. There's not many people in my kind of shape. And a lot of it is because I kept it up over the years. I go to the doctor regularly, and I hope like heck I live longer than my parents, who were on all kinds of medications. I'm fortunate. I'm not on any medication yet. Let's keep it that way.
Keep it that way.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Thanks for sharing that. So as we wind down, I always just kind of go through some rapid fire questions that generally aren't all that rapid fire, but we're going to give it a shot anyways, Lance. And are you ready for some?
Ready.
Couple of easy ones right out of the gate. Android or Apple?
I'm the only one in the family with an Android.
Okay. And I'm sure you get a hard time about that.
I do.
Yeah. Favorite movie? You have one?
Favorite movie's Cocktail with Tom Cruise.
Oh, geez, that's an oldie. Holy cow.
TGI Fridays bartenders trained him for that movie. Love it.
That's why. Yeah. Okay. So you got a story related to it. So that's perfect.
Yep.
And how about music? A favorite band, favorite song?
Journey, Don't Stop Believing.
Ah, beautiful. Gosh, that's a classic too. Holy cow. And favorite swear word?
Well, if I brought my wife in here, she would not hesitate to say it's the F word, also known as fudge.
Fudge.
Fine.
Good for you.
my brother sent my mother for a birthday present, an early birthday present, a fuck button. It said it in every different way imaginable, in every different circumstance. So that'll tell you what my favorite word is. Because of family, growing up in Brooklyn, New York.
Yeah. Okay, that's great. Now, do you have a favorite book that really stands out for you? I'm sure you have many, but is there one that was kind of like, for me, the E-Myth was one of those books, that really, yes. And I've read many since, but that one stands out in my memory because it was pivotal for what I did in business.
Yes.
And, or a book that you lend out or gift often.
Turning around, looking at my giant bookcase.
Yeah.
The short answer is the E-Myth is my favorite book. The other favorite, the 1 Minute Manager series is pretty incredible.
Yeah.
So I tell people, anybody that gets into leadership or has a desire, the 1 Minute Manager is an amazing book. Dr. Ken Blanchard, if I remember correctly, and I have it behind me somewhere, but in the interest of time, the 1 Minute Manager is a necessity. And there's the 1 Minute Manager meets the monkey. There's a whole bunch, and that led into Who Moved My Cheese, about change. But that whole series is incredible.
Yeah. If God exists, what do you want to hear him say when you get to the gates?
You did good, kid.
You did good. Of course you did. And finally, what are you grateful for, Lance?
I'm grateful for where I am in life today, that I get to help people and truly give back. I get to work as hard as I want to. And most importantly, I'm surrounded with great family, kids and wife. And, I live just an amazing life. And, but with that, I am incredibly grateful for being able to be in a position to have a platform to give back and truly help people. I have a lot of phone calls with people that I have a feeling will go nowhere for me financially, but I know they're very helpful for those people. And I continue to do that on a regular basis for people. And sometimes people think I'm crazy when I tell people I will literally work 7 days a week. I had somebody I didn't even know that wanted to have a phone call on a Sunday. And I gave him, I think, 45 minutes yesterday. It wasn't going to benefit me at all, but it definitely helped them.
Well, I think you get to a point where, and I know for myself, and I can speak for Stephanie, is that we get to live our life doing what we love to do, living our purpose, and making a difference in other people's lives. And I think that when we can get to that realization that that really is more fun than even making money and running a business, all of which is a lot of fun. But when you can really make a difference in other people's lives, there's a lot of fulfillment in it. And I guess maybe if you're not wired that way, it doesn't matter. We happen to be. Yes. So I'm always grateful for that. I'm certainly always grateful for the guests that I have and that I attract to the Everyday Millionaire podcast. Lance, this has been a great conversation. Appreciate your time, your wisdom, and all that you shared today on the show. So thanks very much.
My favorite hashtag, changing lives. That's what we do.
Love it. Thanks very much, Lance.
My pleasure.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening. If you found value in the podcast, please take the time to rate and review and share with others. Share with your friends. As it is my goal to always improve and to provide the highest value for you, the listener. If you have any comments, suggestions, or questions you'd like answered, please email me at ceo@reincanada.com. That's ceo@reincanada.com. I look forward to hearing from you. And until next time, Patrick out.